Episode 80 opens with the very bloody climax of the Crystal Catacombs and Frida already transforming, trying to stop Grisha. Like we talked about last time, the purple eyes, the signifier of the vow to renounce war, is already in focus, which may or may not also be a contributing factor to why she is absolutely demolished. We do know for a fact that she was inexperienced with the Titan, and presumably also in combat, but I do wonder whether the vow might have also somehow constrained her ability to use the Titan's power. And by power, I don't mean like the founding Titan's power, I mean like power in general, because the vow was kind of this pacifist thing, so maybe the vow also just kind of stops her from fighting at all. Unfortunately, it's kind of impossible to draw any conclusions from this because our sample pool is tiny. The only other person we've seen who is a royal and tries using the founding Titan is Yuri, who does it in self-defense. So, who knows? Also, side notes, the direction of this sequence is the classic Season 4 thing of the music making it clear that there is no stopping what's on screen. The first minute of the episode is just slaughter, with not a single word spoken and no meaningful resistance whatsoever. The ironically named track, All the Freedoms, already hitting its crescendo as we catch up to where we left off in episode 79. I think I've already yapped about this far too many times, but yes, I absolutely love this direction, 10 out of 10, no notes. What definitely is noteworthy though, is Grisha's eyes turning purple. The simplest explanation here is just that it's a visual cue to show us that he captured the founding Titan, and that's it. However, it could also be a sign of the same, yet also entirely different loss of control that we saw with Frida. Grisha is obviously not a royal and is not bound by the vow, but he is bound by Eren's causality. In many ways, he and Frida are no different. Just another pawn blindly carrying out someone else's will. It's probably just him capturing the founder though. Also, I absolutely love this sting and that cut to eerie silence. As we return to the paths, Zeke is kind enough to explain to the viewers exactly what happened, saying Grisha hesitated but that it was Eren who forced his hand. Episode 79 video for all of that, but Eren then says that he saw his own future during the medal ceremony. Mappa doesn't want to spoil the surprise just yet, so they don't actually give us anything about the rumbling, except they already did in 4K in the literal opening, but okay, let's ignore that. Zeke tries throwing just one last Hail Mary and commands Ymir, who mindlessly turns around and begins her march. Eren begins to pull on the chains as Zeke says that he didn't see everything in his memories. As Eren's hands begin to bleed, he screams and screams until finally... First and foremost, the chains never break. Eren does break out, but he does it through self-mutilation, I guess. Remember that everything in the paths is not real. It's a manifestation of a perceived reality. It's why Ymir and Eren would appear as children within the paths. It's why Armin and Zeke see different things, and so on. Ymir serves Zeke's royal blood, and so his command to chain Eren is absolute. The chains will never break until Ymir wills it. Eren achieves this supposed freedom through brute force and rejection of her servitude. But those chains were never truly broken. Regardless of the freedoms that they'll attain together, they are still chained by Ymir's ideology and far, far more importantly, her trauma. He thinks that he is free, but he's merely repeating the cycle. Those wounds are still open and still actively bleeding. Put a pin in that, we'll circle back to this because we then roll intro and get what is the most insane episode title in the entire series. This one, of course, links right back to episode 1, the only episode in the entire series which has a completely nonsensical title. If you were anime only as I was, well then, a short 9 years later, we finally learned why. It was because it always described Eren's liberation of Ymir. I've also seen a few people ask, who exactly is the you and me in this title? But I think that's kind of the point, as in, there is no me or you. For all intents and purposes, Eren and Ymir are one and the same. The same child who lost everything and struggled to survive in a cruel world. A child who yearned for freedom. And of course, you could also open up the endless box that is the question of causality. Eren himself would wonder whether it was Ymir who guided him here. So the title could also be just Ymir. As in, the Attack Titan and Eren are merely manifestations of Ymir's own desire for freedom. And so the message she sends throughout time could be meant for herself, and EREN is merely the one to deliver it. But alright, let us not get lost in the sauce with the title. There is too much to yap about in this episode. And moving into said episode, we immediately see some very Studio Wit-esque clouds because we're going back in time to episode 40-ish. The music is also the symphonic suite of the Season 3 OST. So I think all of this, especially the Wit clouds, is very much trying to put us right back in that headspace of Historia. I accidentally said Ymir, Founding Titans got my head all mixed up. Flashback we saw in Season 3. But of course, because this is Season 4, just like with Grisha's sons quickly popping in for a visit from the literal future, everything we see here also comes with a mildly disturbing undertone. Also, note the two little morning birds, which I think are meant to symbolize the bond between Frida and Historia. Ymir's flashback would open with a shot almost exactly like this, only with a lone bird, symbolizing her isolation and desire for connection. Frida praises Historia for how well she's reading, and generally, it's all just super cute. Frida was the mother that Historia never had, and considering this entire episode is about inherited memories and how that shapes people, I think this is also one of the big reasons why EREN had an almost innate drive to protect her. Just like Frida, he'd repeatedly try to shield her from the duties of a royal, and he'd even offer to take away her memories exactly like Frida did in pretty much the same exact location. The circumstances around all of those decisions were of course pretty different, but their actions were almost weirdly similar. But as we turn to the book featuring the character Krista, the source of Historia's cover name for the first half of the series, we learn that the book is actually about Ymir, or at least a kind of Ymir. But what's interesting is that it's also a little bit weird. I think it's a fair assumption to say that we as the viewers get a mostly accurate depiction of Ymir's life. But the book, despite being of Eldian origin, also depicts the supposed devil, and it doesn't seem like she is ever portrayed as a goddess or anything like that. It's also unclear why exactly the name Krista is even chosen, though, like we talked about in episode 40, Historia's full cover name of Krista Lens does make narrative sense for her character. Krista is of Greek origin, meaning anointed or chosen one, while Lens means spring. That definitely fits Historia's story, but not really Ymir's, so who knows how much of this book is just a fairy tale and how much of it is actually accurate. My read on it is that it's just a slightly romanticized version of Ymir's childhood, as that part of her story would be directly paralleled to Historia. Who knows though, this is one of those situations where it's kinda hard to disentangle what is just the show trying to tell us a story and how much of it is actually right there. Ymir's story opens with a lone bird, with us then cutting to Historia, who is getting water for presumably some kind of family. We need to do some extreme overanalysis here, as this is literally the one and only scene we get of her before all the shenanigans begin. But I think the scene was immediately meant to show us that same constant desire to be helpful that we saw with Historia in Season 1. We'll talk about this with a pig pen as well, but I think Ymir had a really kind heart that always put others before herself. That's why I say I think the book is mostly meant to parallel Historia's childhood and the lessons Frida taught her. The rest of their stories would get quite messy, and we'll talk about all the mirrorings and parallels as we get to them. But just like Shiganshina, that ordinary day is suddenly interrupted by spears on the horizon. Only, unlike Shiganshina, there is no great tragedy. A single flash later, the town burns and people are in chains. This is just history, and I think that's exactly what Ymir's flashback is all about. It's about showing us that this is humanity. The fall of Shiganshina was shown to us up close and personal, a monstrous act that tore apart families and broke an entire population. It was nothing short of horrifying. But as the story developed, we took just one step back to the previous generation and saw the same thing. The same cruelty of humanity that happily stepped on each other just to get ahead themselves. Except there was no Titan looming over the wall. The fear of the Titans was entirely abstract. And now we go all the way back, and there is no grandiose attack whatsoever, no grand tragedy, nothing. This is supposed to be the beginning of this entire story. Ymir is the first ever Titan. In any other story, this would be the single most detailed flashback that we had ever seen. But it is not. She is a little girl helping an older woman get water from a well, and in less than a minute, with not a single word spoken, a world with no Titans at all displays the same cruelty we saw in Shiganshina. Considering what we've seen of Grisha's life in Marley, I think this should have been blatantly clear already, but nothing about this conflict has ever had anything to do with Titans or Eldians for that matter. They just became the scapegoat for whatever colonialism, resource and land hoarding, or whatever else warlords wanted to do. Titans or no Titans, war existed, it exists in the present, and it will exist long after the Rumbling. Willie's play alone showed just how quickly the narrative can shift from all Eldians bad to just Paradis and Eren Yeager bad. And if we're already on the cynical tour, Ymir's time is also collecting the Infinity Stones of just like savagery, because a moment later, we see their tongues being cut out. This is straight out of our own history, because of course it is. But symbolically, I think it's there to convey a couple of things. Firstly, they have literally lost their voices. They have lost their most fundamental ability of expression. From this day onward, they can only listen and carry out commands. And similarly, I think it's also meant to show how a lot of this will just be lost to history. AOT doesn't really play around that much with the whole history is being written by the victors angle, but we obviously have Marley, who has complete control over their population's understanding of the world, and that is doubly true for Tiber, who retcons even that with an even higher form of history. And of course, in both of those stories, the voices of the conquered nations are just muffled out by force. And kinda sorta the same thing also exists on Paradis, with their memories being literally taken away so as to not stoke the flames of war. And so, after the Tiber and Fritz deal, Paradis and Marley became two almost identical populations, yet each carry completely different histories and no ability to correct that record. As the burning embers turn into flowery petals, Ymir watches the king, presumably take a bride. Like we saw with the lone bird, I always saw Ymir's character as a mixture of extreme codependence and almost compulsive altruism. We've already seen the whole constantly helping others parts, but this scene with the king is one that would burrow itself in her mind and become a point of almost unhealthy obsession. Despite being enslaved by that very man and having her voice taken away, she craves affection so much that she wants connection even with him. Frida's voiceover really emphasizes that fact, with her saying that Historia should grow up to be helpful and loved by everybody. Which very neatly introduces our first extremely clear Historia parallel, or I guess mirroring, or kinda both. Throughout the first couple of seasons, Historia did have a big case of martyrdom, with Freckles Ymir eventually roasting her enough to snap her out of it. And that's not to mention her childhood, where her happiest memory was pretty much being punched in the face by her own mother, which,
Can I ask a question? What is wrong with you?
But later in Season 3, we see that climax as she craves her father's affection. She wants to be accepted by him, even when he was the one who abandoned her. But in the Crystal Catacombs, learning of everything that she had learned, she changes, and very fittingly, rips off Eren's chains, proclaiming that she would become the worst girl who has ever lived, and that she doesn't care about humanity. Obviously, the whole worst girl to have ever lived was an exaggeration, and all she meant was that she is done trying to constantly be this people pleaser and a little diligent helper always working for someone else. Ymir, on the other hand, never got that liberator. She spent the rest of her life completely absorbed by that fantasy of being loved and praised. She became a slave to that fantasy, which I think is also why Ymir's story is then mirrored with Mikasa. Unlike Ymir, who had her home burned by a terrible man that she would still want to get close to, Mikasa was saved by Eren. That was the moment when she began to peek into Mikasa's head. That moment became fascinating to Ymir, because that was her deepest desire. It was someone who cared enough to put her first. He was a boy who fought for Mikasa, a boy who wrapped her in his scarf and made sure that she was safe. And so she watched as Mikasa struggled to accept what Eren eventually became. She watched as Mikasa couldn't stop herself from feeling the way she did about him. Except, Mikasa would break free. But okay, that's jumping ahead. We then cut to the empty pig pen, and this time we will jump ahead and already talk about the fact that it was Ymir who set them free. And here, I have two different but also quite similar interpretations. Firstly, I think it's again just her kind heart. She saw a part of herself in them, just hopeless little lives locked away in a pen waiting to be slaughtered. Letting them go might have just been an act of kindness, an act of her own deepest desire to be free of the pen. even if she knew it would come to haunt her. Alternatively, I think you could also look at it from the complete opposite point of view. Pigs are often used to portray the filth of greed and power, so this could rather have been a tiny act of rebellion, a way she could reclaim some of that power and spite the king. But as we cut to the king, we get a very ominous line of,
"I'll pluck an eye from each of your skulls and call this settled. Slaves can easily go about their work with one apiece."
First off, unlike the tongue-cutting thing, slave owners targeting eyes is a lot more rare for one very simple reason: utility. Losing depth perception would drastically slow down their work, and you'd naturally want to avoid that. If just terror or political messaging is the goal, well then it's not a concern. But as far as I can find, and sources for this are obviously pretty spotty, eyes were never really a focus for punishments. Which neatly leads me on to numero 2. I think the whole eye thing is meant to be loosely inspired by Odin in Norse mythology. Prose Edda describes how the well of Mimir, situated beneath the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil, held much wisdom, and that Odin traded one of his eyes in exchange for a drink. In Attack on Titan's case, Ymir loses an eye, eventually ends up by the gargantuan tree, pretty clearly meant to be Yggdrasil. She falls into the water, which is the well beneath the roots, and eventually becomes a Titan, which is the deal with Mimir. And if you want to run with that idea even further, there are actually 3 wells in total, giving you Maria, Sina, and Rose. But numero 3, the whole Odin trade thing, also kinda sorta applies to EREN. The whole thing of slaves have no need for 2 eyes, I think is clear. He is a slave to freedom, so he pokes out an eye in pursuit of that, yada yada. But the catalyst for that was the memory blasting. So I think you could also take that to be a deal with the Well of Mimir of sorts. Also, this is extreme overanalyzing, I know, but Ymir being instantly blamed, even if we know for a fact that it was her, I think is also a great example of the cynical self-preservation of humanity. We never learn how exactly others found out about the pigs, so it's hard to draw any conclusions there, but the sheer fact that the blame is immediately shifted onto Ymir and Ymir alone, I think is another very good example of how quickly people can get behind the scapegoats. It was nighttime, so we don't even truly know if they ever knew that it was Ymir. We don't know if others celebrated her rebellion. We don't know if anyone might have helped her. Yet all of the blame is instantly just put on her. Again, most likely it really was just her, but I find the idea interesting, especially considering how common these rebel factions are in the series. I almost wish we did see some more hints of a rebel faction of sorts right alongside Ymir, only for her to be blamed for all of it. But okay, let's not get stuck in the weeds. The 13 hands are of course signifiers of the 13-year curse. Even though the curse started because Ymir was a titan for 13 years and the hands are not actually a symbol of anything, but they are a symbol because Mappa made them a symbol. Okay, trust me on this one. Thankfully, King Fritz is kind enough to spell out that freedom is freedom in quotation marks. But yes, this is just paralleling EREN, who, with all of his power, would still be a slave, just like Ymir. He can run, he can tear himself limb from limb, he can fight with all of his might, but those chains were never broken. As Ymir falls to the ground, she sees a white flower with 9 petals that is covered in blood. We see a very similar sight in the Season 3 Historia ED, but the 9 petals are a signifier of the 9 titans, each born in blood out of the primal need to just survive. As she presses on, she sees the weird mangled tree that is the World Tree. I mentioned it in passing, but quick lore recap on what the World Tree even is. In Norse mythology, the World Tree Yggdrasil connects the 9 realms, which, yes, is also the inspiration of the 9 titans. The titans and the 9 realms aren't really directly analogous, but you can kinda sorta shift them around to kind of make it fit. Whatever the case, the tree here is just a progenitor for all the Titan craziness. So, in the Attack on Titan story, it very much is our Yggdrasil. As Ymir stumbles within, she loses her footing and falls into the deep waters below, with the hallucigenia parasite worm boy thingy latching onto her back. This might be another Norse reference. Prose Edda describes a being named Nidhogg, a serpent that is said to gnaw at the roots of the World Tree and is associated with the dead. He is also mentioned at the end of Voluspa, I think, but he is said to herald Ragnarok. That is pretty much what it is. It is a weird thing inside a deep well inside the world tree and is eventually the thing that enables the rumbling. EREN's founding Titan form is literally this, so yes, it does herald Ragnarok. And on that note, let's talk about why ECMA even chose this kind of being to explain the Titan powers. First off, I, along with pretty much everyone else I think, calls it hallucigenia, but it's not actually a hallucigenia. Everyone just calls it that because it's clearly the inspiration, but it's not that, so everything we talk about it should naturally be taken with at least a grain of salt. That being said, the hallucigenia is a real Cambrian-era creature and one of Earth's earliest complex lifeforms that got its name from, and I quote, its bizarre and dreamlike appearance. By and large, I think the idea with this was to convey pure, unadulterated survival and adaptation. It is a weird-looking spinal thingy that has survived hundreds of millions of years in cold, dark waters. It is nothing more than evolution to survive the cruelty of nature. Which neatly leads me on to numero 2. It is a complete deconstruction of any and all explanations of how the Titans came to be. It was never any kind of divine intervention or a deal with the devil. It was just biology. Weird biology, yes, but biology. Attack on Titan has never been governed by these higher forces or otherworldly influences. Titans or no Titans, it has always been just chaos and survival. And finally, numero 3, I think it also plays on the Lovecraftian horror angle, because really, this is some incomprehensible cosmic parasite that adapted in a way to, well, create Titans and transcend time. And if you really want to go overboard with the analysis, the fact that this is a weird parasite could also be yet another example of questioning free will. Who was it that truly wanted to survive in this moment? Was it the hallucigenia, or was it Ymir? Who is currently feeding off of who? So, all in all, I think it's just meant to blend the cruelty of nature and life's constant fight to survive, and a cosmic element to elevate that grotesque weirdness we're all too familiar with the Titans already. As for how that colors Ymir's story, well, it's pretty much everything we just talked about. I think her Titan is a manifestation of her fight to survive, and more than that, it is a representation of survival as an absolute state of nature. Even when death would have been more welcoming, nature forces her to live. Also, this episode has been so dense that I have barely used my That's So Cool cards, but I must say, Ymir's Titan is really cool. I wish we got to see more weird looking Titan forms, and by weird I mean like actual protruding ribs and stuff. That looks so cool. As Ymir returns to the king, we get another series of recontextualizations and demystifying Ymir as a whole. In Grisha's flashback, we heard how it was Ymir who built roads and whatnot, and while that might be true to an extent, we see that most of it was just done by slaves. Just like with the hallucigenia being simple biology, this is just disentangling these fantasies and zeroing back in on, well, human suffering and exploitation. But the far bigger bombshell is something we all implicitly already knew, but is finally spelled out in crystal clarity.
You have helped the tribe of Eldia to become both large and powerful. The Marleyans are our hated foes.
And whoopsie daisy, isn't that a conundrum? Marley was going to kill all Eldians because they had quote-unquote devil's blood. But Eldia wanted to kill all Marleyans because they're vile people. I think this was ECM dropping all subtlety and slamming us right in the face with some mighty cognitive dissonance. For the entire series, we could hide behind the statement that it was Marley who started this war and that Paradis did only whatever it takes to survive. But now, we see that Eldia subjugated Marley for who knows how long. So, are we really comfortable with putting ourselves behind Paradis? Paradis in the present day was peaceful, but wasn't Eldia the instigator on the equally peaceful Marley? On one hand, the answer is obvious to everyone. Present-day Paradis never did a single thing to invite Marley's attack. The objectively correct answer is to just stop. Both sides lay down their weapons and this cycle of revenge stops then and there. But anyone can also tell you that it's not that simple and unfortunately never will be. How could you ever live knowing that your land and your people were just traded away? How could you not fight to liberate them? to reunite families and communities unjustly destroyed by some madman with an inferiority complex. How could you ever be sure that they won't strike again? I could write a dozen other rhetorical questions, but let's just cut to the finale. Humanity just kinda sucks. Simple as. We are vile, destructive creatures who measure the world only by how much we can take. On an individual level, some of us can forgive and lay down their weapons for good. But as a whole, yeah, we really suck. The only way of ever stopping this was to make it too costly to start in the first place. But with Ymir's Titan entering the picture, that delicate balance was destroyed, and it would take many centuries until the Great Titan War at least somewhat restored it. Putting philosophy aside for a second, we continue that deconstruction of the supposed goddess Ymir, as we see her pregnant and watching over the marching military. This is very clearly mirroring Astoria, with whom too we'd have the same exact framing. Only with Astoria, there would be no military marching behind her, and instead of being a lone weapon in a war machine, she'd have the farm lad right there by her side. Also note that Fritz goes from having just one ring on his pinky to a whole 6 rings by the time he conquers Marley. Historically, rings, and really all other accessories, have carried a very wide range of meanings, everything from just pure displays of wealth and power to specific oaths or promises. In Fritz's case though, I'm actually fairly certain that they're just supposed to be marriage rings. When he is being dressed, he is surrounded by exactly 5 women, all dressed exactly the same as Ymir. So I think all 6 are just marriage rings. Then again, in this scene, it looks like he also has rings on the other hand, even though he didn't, like literally a second ago, so I don't know if this is just me reading into things a little bit too much and is just an animation quirk, because I'm pretty sure the hand has just been copy-pasted. The rings are also different in the manga, so this is definitely me overanalyzing. But as we cut to the capitulation of the Marleyan forces, we suddenly punch in on a soldier who reaches for a spear and attempts to kill the king. This is very much analogous to the Scouts and their knowingly self-destructive fight against Marley's Titans. This Marleyan soldier couldn't listen to Fritz's continued ramblings, and he was never going to accept defeat of his homeland just laying down. And so, fully knowing that he is going to die, he stands up and takes one last shot at the king. I already talked about this a second ago, but the weirdest thing about this is that within the context of this flashback and Attack on Titan as a whole, we should be rooting for this guy right here. This is the guy who got his home annihilated by the Eldian war machine. But just like many times before, Ymir's martyrdom kicks in and she leaps in front of the spear. This is where things get spicy, because I think there are 2 very different schools of thoughts. On one hand, I think you can read this as just her dying instantly, which I think would be fitting for this flashback. Ymir's entire story has been about demystifying all of these vague, surreal things we had heard. So her dying to just a plain and simple spear from, importantly, a rebelling soldier fighting for freedom would be the perfect bookend. And it also fits the whole Helios story who brought down the devil, so maybe. That being said, I think there's also an argument to be made that there is something else going on here, especially because this is not the first time we have seen something like this. I think this is Ymir accepting death. Fritz says that a single spear couldn't bring her down, and Ymir herself glimpses the flower that started it all, and it's only then that she shuts her eyes, which I read as her accepting death, or at least losing her reason to live, and therefore regenerates. We saw something very similar with Mikasa in Season 1, where after the supposed death of EREN, she too gives up her fights. She had lost her reason to live, but when push came to shove, the memory of EREN, the memory that was so fascinating to Ymir, jolts her awake. That was already a small clue toward her being strong enough to break free of those self-imposed chains that was her total devotion to EREN. Ymir never had that moment of true connection, and so when she lay there, I think she just gave up her fights. And very fittingly, when Ymir dies and appears in the paths, she is once again just a child. Again, I've briefly mentioned this before, but I've always viewed the paths as the one true representation of perceived reality. Ymir never broke free of that longing, she never broke free of that constant need to serve. And so, when in the paths, she regresses to that same little slave girl destined to serve for eternity. Similarly, when EREN would appear in the paths during the rumbling, we see a Shiganshina self because that was the moment he was radicalized and his core self was set in stone. Also, very quick Norse lore, while there isn't anything that is directly analogous to the paths, the world itself is formed from the giant's Ymir's body, so I think that is definitely the inspiration here. Along with the world tree obviously, which I forgot to mention last time. Also, we see further paralleling of his story in Ymir, but importantly, is there to draw a stark contrast of how differently they ended up rather than how similar they are. They started in the same exact place, but like we see with the pregnancy scene, their lives turn out very different. Ymir eventually regresses to that same child, never getting the opportunity to truly love her daughters. Historia, on the other hand, had a happy family and cherished her little daughter. That being said, I think the paths, similar to the formation of the Titans in the first place, is Ymir's desire manifested. It is a world outside of time that allows her to be connected to everyone all at once, thereby fulfilling that need for connection. But obviously, she is still a slave, so it's all bandage fixes and not really true, just like EREN breaking the chains. And again, just a quick step back from my gushing. Oh my god, the purely music-led scenes of Ymir just walking and building and then walking and building is pure brilliance. The sheer contrast between this cosmic plane outside of time and a god who is nothing more than a little slave girl is just sheesh. And then her stumbling but simply standing up as if nothing happened and continuing her march, it's so good. What definitely warrants overanalysis though is Ymir's Titans being split. From a strict realism point of view, the Titan thingy was a parasite, and parasites must ensure the survival of their host and the ability to spread to a new host if they themselves are to survive. So Ymir's body being literally consumed is probably a surefire way of ensuring that whatever that parasite is does get passed on to a new host. Though that does still spark the question of why her Titan is split precisely into three, her daughters Rosemary and Sina, after whom the walls are of course named. I think the simplest answer here is just that Ymir wished it. When she appears in the paths initially, the tree connects to nothing and she is alone. But when her body is consumed by her daughters, it branches into three distinct segments, each for her daughters that would now be connected to her for eternity. But that still leaves the question of why does the 3 become 9? Yes, it is 9 because of the 9 Norse realms, but in-universe, the explanation is still unclear. Maybe there's some kind of biological explanation or limitation for the parasite, but at that point I think we're right back to the endless conversation about whether any of this is even Ymir, or whether or not Attack on Titan is actually a zombie story, and Ymir's body got hijacked by weird parasite-made titans, kind of zombies. But then comes cinema.
This world persists, our reign will...
I'll end it! Here and now! You're nobody's slave, and you're no god either!
You've been all alone, waiting 2,000 years for someone.
I do have to ruin the hype because we need to stop, zoom in, and enhance. This is the first time we see Ymir's eyes. Eyes are fundamentally humanizing, but it is only when EREN tells her that she doesn't have to serve anyone that we see them. He came here, not for her power, but to set her free and to destroy the shackles that had held her down for millennia. Well, I guess he does come here for her power as well, but she very much shares in his unshackled rage, so it's less so him using her power and more so them using it together. But that then leads me on to numero 2. While it is borderline impossible to discern any color within the paths and everything just kinda looks blue, when you put Ymir and EREN side by side, her eyes do look like the same hue as EREN's, aka the Attack Titan green. I've already yapped about the Attack Titan for far too long, so super TLDR, I've always seen the Attack Titan as Ymir's yearning for freedom manifested. It is the only Titan that was never captured by neither Marley or the royal family of Paradis. It was a Titan that marched throughout time and fought against its own peers for one reason and one reason only: to liberate Ymir from her own grasp. So if Ymir's eyes are indeed the Attack Titan green, I think it'd be a very nice way to reveal the origins of that yearning for freedom. But with that said, Okay, there is nothing to overanalyze here. Eren's transformation is literally like the coolest thing of all time, like seriously ever. The color grading violently turning to this hellish red is excellent. The lightning literally cracking open the world as the walls come down is horrifying. And then Footsteps of Doom, easily one of the greatest tracks in the series by the way, kicking into high gear as Gabby comes face to face with the monster they created is nothing short of breathtaking. Eren's founding titan looks like the hallucigenia in giant form. This is life and survival in its purest form, a grotesque result of evolution. I'll sound like a broken record at this point, but this is what I always believe the Rumbling and the founding titan is meant to represent. The collective suffering, the collective rage of an entire people. A people that truly believed that the only way to survive was to adapt to the cruelty of the world and to become a thing that is impossible to kill. The Founding Titan memory shenanigans are just there as a story delivery vehicle that allows us to explore all of that conflict, both internal and external, within a single character. The Rumbling is the cumulative suffering of every life that has been smothered out across thousands of years. Lifetimes worth of radicalization that finally comes to a breaking point. The Titan inheritance is just a fantastical shiny form of making the inherited war and hatred be very, very literal. It allows us to see the beginning of this conflict, the middle and how it eventually broke, but also even after. And also, if you look at Eren's Founding Titan form, his hands are kinda held up by strings, like, you know, a puppet, which, for someone who yaps about freedom, he sure does like cosplaying a puppet. Meanwhile in Shiganshina, Armin shouts that they have won, saying Eren was always in control, he was just playing along. And like we talked about a few episodes ago now, yes, Armin is right, but I think the framing of the scene kinda gives away the fact that, well, not exactly. Just a moment later, Armin realizes that all of the walls came down, with him immediately saying that this is beyond overkill. Also, quick callback to everyone who has been watching since the Season 1 videos, when the Rumbling starts, look at the Titans' feet. They never pull up any dirt. The Titans are not buried. The Wall Titans are 50 meters, not 60 meters. The foundation is the crystal that goes inside of the walls, not the Titans themselves. Otherwise, there would have been a big trench 10 meters deep all around the walls. Or, I guess where the walls were, but you get what I mean. Now, if you ever left a comment about this, go back and delete it. There is no trench, they never pull up any ground, they just start walking. The Wall Titans are 50 meters. Also, we never actually know how many Wall Titans there are, and even if you do calculations, it is obviously going to be very, very rough, but comparing just Shiganshina to all of the walls, it is like a hundreds versus hundreds of thousands, so Armin seeing this must have definitely rattled him a little bit.
全てのユミルの民に継ぐ。俺の名はエレン・イエーガー。そこにある命を。
And with that, that is episode 80. Man, reaching Ymir's story? We're really getting close to the end, aren't we? I mean, yeah, watching this episode for the first time, the fact that Mappa didn't do a cheap cliffhanger with Eren like just reaching Ymir, but we literally see the Rumbling start, and the fact that Ymir's flashback is pretty much just a slap in the face, and it's like the Eldian Empire did kind of start this, so kind of Marley, they do kind of have a point as well. I mean, I think this whole thing is the perfect encapsulation of what the series is, not just from the story, but also, again, the fact that Mappa just kind of shoved it in our face. There was no anything with the Rumbling, it just kind of started, and I love that. I love this episode. I love the fact that many people still fell for this hook, line, and sinker, because Isayama showed us that it was the Eldian Empire who kind of subjugated Marley, and it was Marley who rose up and fought for freedom, but people conveniently forget that because Parody, those are our guys, and Marley, those are the bad guys, right? A lot of these absolute statements, and then people are hit with cognitive dissonance, and seemingly a lot of people can't really deal with that, and that's what makes this whole series so great, because there are a lot of simple answers until we realize they're not really that simple, and I love it, because after this episode, I mean, it's kind of over, right? Like, you kind of just want to throw your hands up and say, yeah, you know what? I don't know how we can fix this anymore. It's just so bad. And I love it. It's great storytelling. You know what else I love? This segue to our patrons and YouTube members. I'm just going to start doing the Linus thing. But yes, I want to give a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team. Company sent me a list. Elijah, Winston Booth, Don Coonley, and Hi Dandy, I think. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.